You're standing in a cave in southern Germany. It's 40,000 years ago, and it is dark. Not dim. Dark. The kind of dark that presses on your eyes and swallows your hands. You're holding a small piece of mammoth ivory, still warm from your grip, and you've been carving it for weeks. More than 400 hours with a sharp sliver of flint. It has the body of a person. It has the head of a lion. It is a thing that has never walked the earth, that never will, that exists only because your mind built it out of nothing. You didn't carve a lion. You didn't carve a man. You carved something in between, a being from a world you cannot see, but somehow know was there. Think about that for a second. Before cities, before writing, before farming, a human being sat alone in the dark and made a god. So here's a question that sounds simple, and absolutely is not. Did ancient humans believe in magic? Not stage magic. Not rabbits and top hats and cards up a sleeve. I mean the real thing. Unseen forces, spirits living inside the animals, powers you could bend with the right ritual, a whole invisible world layered on top of the visible one. We like to picture our ancestors as practical, hungry, cold, too busy surviving to bother inventing religion. Hunt the deer, gather the berries, don't freeze, don't starve, don't die. Where's the time for magic in a life that hard? But when you actually dig, literally dig down into the floors of these caves, you find something strange. You find that the belief in the unseen might be older than farming, older than the wheel, older than the first written word. Maybe older than our own species. And the deeper you go, the harder it gets to draw a clean line between them and you. So let's actually look at what's down there. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Magic isn't a single invention that happened once in one place that we can point to. It's not one thing, it's never one thing. It's a stack. Red pigment, carved figurines, painted caves, half animal beings, graves stuffed with treasure, and one stubborn piece of wiring in your brain that is still running as you read this. 6 layers, and I'm going to hand them to you in order from interesting all the way up to wait. That changes the whole question. Let's go. Start with the humblest clue imaginable. Red dirt. In a cave on the southern coast of South Africa, Blombos Cave, archaeologists pulled up chunks of ochre, a soft iron-rich stone that grinds down into a deep, blood-red powder. Now, ochre by itself is not mysterious. It's genuinely useful stuff. It works as a glue additive, as sunscreen, as bug repellent, as hide tanning. Ancient people used tons of it for boring, practical reasons. But one piece, dated to around 75,000 years ago, has a pattern deliberately scratched into its face. A careful crosshatch, a neat diamond grid, made by a hand that meant to make it. And in 2018 in the journal Nature, researchers announced another Blombos stone. This one marked with lines drawn in an ochre crayon about 73,000 years ago. The oldest known drawing on planet Earth. Now let's be honest, a crosshatch is not a cathedral. Nobody's kneeling in front of a diamond grid. But sit with what it is. Someone made a mark that you could not eat, could not wear, could not throw at an animal. A mark that meant something they couldn't otherwise say. And here's what's uncanny about red. It follows humans absolutely everywhere. We sprinkle it on our dead. We paint it on the living. We smear it on cave walls and grind it into our burials. Blood is red. Life is red. Danger is red. Long before anyone carved a letter, we were already using a color as a symbol. One thing standing in for another idea entirely. That's the first layer. It isn't magic yet, but it's the machinery that makes magic possible. A mind that lets a red stone mean life and death and everything in between. Once a brain can do that, once it can hold an idea that isn't physically in front of it, every door opens. You can imagine tomorrow. You can imagine a person who died. You can imagine a power you've never seen. Symbols are the runway, and everything else in this video takes off from there. Now hand that mind a body to carve. Around 40,000 years ago, in that same stretch of Germany that gave us the Lion Man, someone shaped the Venus of Hohlefels. It's a tiny woman carved from mammoth ivory, all hips and breasts and belly, barely bigger than a thumb. Archaeologist Nicholas Conard's team dug it out in 2008, and it was published in the journal Nature the following year. It is the oldest undisputed image of a human being found anywhere on Earth. And here's the detail that grabs me and won't let go. Where the head should be, there's a small, carefully polished loop, a ring. You could thread a cord through it and wear this woman around your neck. So this wasn't art hung on a wall to admire from across the room. This was a thing you carried on your body, close to your skin, small enough to hide inside a closed fist. We honestly don't know what she meant to the person who made her. Maybe fertility, maybe protection, maybe a goddess, maybe a lucky charm, maybe all of it at once. Archaeologists even have a running, only half-joking rule. When you have no idea what an object was for, you call it ritual, but strip the guesses away and you're left with one hard fact. A person spent hours carving a figure and then made very sure they could keep it on them. That is what an amulet is. It's an object you believe is quietly working on your behalf, warding off the bad, pulling in the good. And human beings have been making them in an unbroken line for 40,000 years and counting. Then humans went underground, and they did something genuinely breathtaking. In the Chauvet Cave in France, on limestone walls painted around 36,000 years ago, there are lions and woolly rhinos and horses that seem to gallop when the firelight flickers across them. Over at Lascaux, roughly 17,000 years ago, there are bulls the size of a bus, charging in ochre and charcoal. And here is the strange telling part. These paintings are deep, hundreds of meters back into pitch-black caves that nobody actually lived in, down tunnels you'd have to crawl through single file by torchlight, dragging your pigments and your fat-burning lamp behind you. You do not put your greatest masterpiece where no one can casually see it, unless the place itself is the point. Unless the dark is sacred, so why do it? The oldest serious theory, floated by a French scholar named Salomon Reinach back in 1903 and later made famous by the Abbé Breuil, was hunting magic. The logic goes, paint the bison, and you gain power over the bison. Draw the kill, and the kill comes true. The picture works like a wish, a rehearsal, a spell you cast with a brush. Paint the beast, catch the beast. It's a beautiful, satisfying idea, and hold that thought because we are absolutely coming back to whether it holds up. But look at what the theory quietly assumes these people believed. That an image has real power over the real thing. That the drawing and the animal are secretly, invisibly connected. That is not decoration. That is sympathetic magic. The ancient, stubborn conviction that like affects like, that what you do to the symbol happens to the source. And think about how much this cost them. Someone ground the pigments, rendered the fat for the lamps, learned the animals by heart, and crawled into the deepest, most dangerous dark they knew. Not to hide from a storm, but to make a picture. People do not take that kind of risk for a hobby. They take it for something they believe genuinely matters, something with real stakes attached. Whatever was happening on those walls, it was serious business, and it was pointed straight at a world they couldn't touch. Which brings us straight back to that lion man in the dark. And it turns out he has a great deal of company. Deep inside the cave of the Trois Frères in France, high up on a wall above the chamber, there's a painted figure that the priest and archaeologist Henri Breuil sketched in the 1920s and nicknamed the Sorcerer. He drew it with the antlers of a stag, the ears of a wolf, the round staring eyes of an owl, a beard, and the crouched legs of a dancing man, half human, half beast. Scholars have a word for creatures like this, therianthropes. And once you know the word, you start seeing them all over the deep past. From Ice Age Europe to a hunting scene in a cave on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, painted at least 43,000 years ago. Here is why that should stop you cold. A lion is real. A man is real. But a man with a lion's head is not an observation. It's an argument about reality. It says the boundary between human and animal can be crossed. It says a person can become something else. Jill Cook, a curator at the British Museum, has called that ivory lion man the oldest known evidence of religious belief in the world. And remember the cost of it. Experiments suggest the figure took over 400 hours to carve in an ice age by a small band of people who needed every daylight hour just to eat. That's not idle whittling. That's devotion. You simply do not pour that much of your short, cold life into a being that doesn't exist. Unless on some level you can't switch off. You believe that it does. These half-animal figures aren't monsters. They're mediators. They're the shape a human takes when they step out of this world and into the spirit one. Now follow the belief right through death and out the other side. On the edge of the Russian city of Vladimir, at a site called Sungir, archaeologists uncovered a burial about 34,000 years old, and it rewrote what we thought Ice Age people were capable of. 2 children, a boy and a girl, laid out head to head and covered from skull to toe in beads. Not a scattered handful, roughly 10,000 beads, each one individually carved by hand from mammoth ivory. Careful experiments suggest a single bead took something close to an hour to make. Do that arithmetic, and you are staring at years of steady human labor, deliberately taken out of the world of the living and buried in the frozen ground with 2 kids. And that's not all they got. They were sent off with spears made from mammoth tusks that had somehow been straightened, a technique we still don't fully understand. Carved ivory animals, hundreds of pierced fox canine teeth. One child's cap was sewn thick with beads and fox teeth like a crown. Just sit with what a burial like that is actually saying. You do not spend thousands of hours dressing a dead child for a long journey unless you are certain in your bones that the journey is real. Grave goods are a wager on the afterlife. A suitcase packed for a destination nobody living has ever seen. And here's the gut punch detail. One of the Sungir children had short, bent, malformed leg bones, a body that clearly struggled to move through life. In death, that child was dressed and honored like royalty. Whatever these people believed, it told them with total confidence that a person does not simply stop when the breathing does. And notice the pattern quietly building here. The bent legs at Sungir. The malformed spine we're about to meet in Israel. Over and over, the most elaborate ancient burials belong to people whose bodies were different. Marked in a world with no medicine, as strange. It's as if difference itself read as a sign. A hint that this person had one foot somewhere else. That instinct to see the unusual body as a window into the unseen is about as old as belief itself. And a belief that big needs someone to run it. In a cave called Hilazon Taktit, tucked into the hills of northern Israel, the archaeologist Leora Grossman uncovered a grave about 12,000 years old, belonging to a people we call the Natufians, hunter-gatherers living right on the knife's edge of the first farming. Inside was a woman, roughly 45 years old, small, with a deformed spine and pelvis that would have forced her into a strange, dragging, lopsided walk. And she was not buried like anybody else in her world. She was laid into a carefully cut, stone-lined pit and packed in with 86 tortoise shells. Then it gets specific in a way that raises the hair on your neck. A complete golden eagle's wing, the pelvis of a leopard, the forearm of a wild boar. 2 stone marten skulls, the tail of an aurochs, a wild cow, and a human foot that did not belong to her. In a study published in 2008 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Grossman and the zoo archaeologist Natalie Monroe made the case that this was the grave of a shaman, one of the oldest religious specialists ever found. And the bones around her tell the rest of the story. Her community threw a feast at her funeral, butchering dozens of tortoises, and then they sealed her body under a heavy stone slab, almost as if to keep her firmly in place. You don't weigh down a body you aren't at least a little worried about. Here is a real person with a name we'll never know, whose entire job was the unseen, who spoke for the spirits, healed the sick, and walked between the worlds. 12,000 years ago, magic wasn't just a private belief anymore. It was a profession. Now let's be honest, because this is exactly where a lot of documentaries quietly oversell it. And I'm not going to. It is genuinely tempting to look at every scratched rock and every buried bead and shout, religion. But the ground fights back. And good science lets it. Take that hunting magic theory. Paint the bison to catch the bison. When researchers actually sat down and counted, they found that most painted animals show no wounds at all. No spears, no arrows, no blood. Worse, the caves are crowded with creatures Ice Age people rarely ate, like lions and rhinos and bears. You don't cast a hunting spell on a predator you're mostly trying not to become dinner for. The tidy little theory largely fell apart under its own evidence. Or take the single most famous ritual grave of all, Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where in 1960 Ralph Selecki found a Neanderthal buried alongside dense clumps of ancient pollen. The flower burial, offered for decades, as proof that Neanderthals mourned their dead with bouquets. It's a genuinely gorgeous story. But in 2023, a team restudied that pollen and concluded it was most likely carried into the grave by burrowing bees, not grieving mourners. So, no, not every red rock is a spell, and not every flower is a funeral. The honest answer is that ancient belief is real but slippery, and the science has to stay ruthlessly skeptical to be worth anything. But there's one last thing I saved for the very end, and it's the part that quietly changes the entire question. We keep asking why ancient humans believed in magic, as if belief in the unseen were some awkward phase our species simply had to grow out of, like a fever that finally broke. So flip it around. Ask instead why that belief shows up everywhere, in every culture, on every continent, the moment humans appear in the record. The answer might be sitting right now inside your own skull. Psychologists have a name for it: the hyperactive agency detection device. The idea, developed by researchers like Stuart Guthrie and Justin Barrett, is simple and a little brutal. Picture yourself out on the open savanna, and you hear a sudden rustle in the tall grass. It could be the wind. It could be a lion. If you assume just the wind and you happen to be wrong, you are lunch. If you assume something's there and you're wrong, you feel a bit silly for about 2 seconds, then move on. Over 1 million years, evolution does that math and builds a brain that leans hard, always, toward the same answer. Something is out there, and it means to act. We are the descendants of the nervous ones, the ancestors who saw a face in every shadow and a will behind every storm, and that exact same wiring, tuned over the ages to keep you alive, does not politely switch off once the danger has passed. It keeps filling the dark with agents. It turns thunder into anger, and luck into a gift, and death into a doorway to somewhere else. Here's the quotable version. We didn't invent the unseen. We are built to feel it. That figurine on a cord, that lion-headed god, that shaman pinned under her stone, they are not primitive mistakes made by simpler minds. They are the natural, predictable output of a brain that survived precisely by assuming the world was watching it back. And that is not a metaphor. That is neuroscience. So come all the way back to now. You're not standing in a cave anymore. You're holding a glowing rectangle of glass in a world that's been mapped and measured and lit from every angle. And still, you knock on wood. You feel watched in an empty room. You talk out loud to someone who is gone. That 40,000-year-old wiring is still humming quietly behind your eyes, still rushing to fill every silence with someone. So, did ancient humans believe in magic? Look again at the red ochre, the ivory charm on its cord, the galloping painted lion. The child dressed in 10,000 beads for a journey none of us can see. Yes, of course they did. The far stranger truth is that you never entirely stopped. The cave only got brighter. The mind stayed exactly the same. If this quietly rewired how you see your own reflexes, sit with that feeling a while.